Right. And we're off. Hey, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our May webinar here at the Products That Count New York City chapter webinar series. I'm thrilled to be joined by Darrien Watson. He's got a stellar background here, and I think is going to be a big asset and great resource for us today. Really excited for our topic. Um, just a little bit about myself and the Products That Count brand. For those who are not familiar, um, Products That Count is a multinational community for product managers and executives, mid-level folks in the product community. We've got over 500,000 folks in product management as part of our ranks here all over the world. And myself, I am the head of chapter for our New York City arm. And over time, that's going to mean a lot more. We're going to be working on some in-person events for you guys and, continuing to sort of foster the product community here in New York. But I'm really excited to continue on our webinar series and drive engagement through just having this opportunity to discuss different topics that are important for PMs all over the place, especially as it relates to I think what we're talking about today, different techniques for product management in startups versus larger companies. I know that is top of mind for a lot of PMs that I talk to who are thinking about where they fit best. So I think Darrien's an awesome person to go through this with. So you can see, native New Yorker and has a great background here with a diverse set of experiences that I think is going to lend itself well to this conversation. Darrien, I don't want to steal your thunder here completely, but welcome. We're thrilled to have you. Do you mind taking a few minutes to introduce yourself before we dive into our topic?
Sure. Welcome, everybody. My name is Darrien Watson. I'm a two-time founder. I got some experience in product management at large companies, a company that actually went public while I was there, Series A funded startup, and then two of my own startups, one of which I recently raised over $1.5 million to build out our team and go to market with. I'm from New York. As I mentioned before, I really love building products. Even sometimes, as a CEO, I got to focus on a lot of other things, but I love spending my time building products, talking about launching products, building products, and even mentoring other product managers and even founders might be a step behind me.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. Yeah, I think just that gamut of experience. I know you've been sort of in the big company side. Obviously, we worked together when you had a stint here at Intap, but prior to that, you've been at big banks and another sort of larger environment, larger company environments, and now getting to run it back as a founder and go through that journey on the startup side. That's awesome perspective. So we're going to be kind of talking through different angles of the product experience and as it relates to what's different when you're working at a big company and a small company, and how you might want to think about where you fit best, where your skills are most applicable, what sorts of journeys you find most fulfilling. I think both sides have pluses and minuses. We're going to dig into all of that here today. And we would encourage you guys to be interactive throughout. If you've got questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. We're going to go ahead and answer those as they come up here live during the discussion. So, to start, I know, Darrien, we wanted to talk a little bit about being at a startup. That's where you're at now. I think that's where things lend themselves quite naturally to kind of get started. So, why don't you talk us through a little bit about what that startup experience is like from a product standpoint, and some things that are top of mind for you in this role today?
Sure. There's a lot of things, a lot of directions I could go in. I think definitely with a startup, it's a lot of ups and downs for sure. I can't really get too excited about the wins or too down about the lows. Uh, Two things for sure, though. I, and when working at a product-centric startup, I wanted to just highlight one, that you really have to read between the lines, and two, you've got to wear a lot of hats. Firstly, when it comes to like reading between the lines, what I mean by that is that again, being that you're working at a product-centric startup, oftentimes, the product is not mature. You don't have a brand. You have to spend a lot of time speaking to customers to often understand what they want, but it's not going to be crystal clear uh, exactly what they want. Sometimes they might say what they want, and I've spent time building out some features only to find out that they don't use it or that's not how they want to use it. Even after going through iterations of designs and testing, and so there's a level of gut that you've got to really sort of tap into, and that really, in order to do that really well, it makes sense to understand not just the customers but the market. And that brings me to my second point. It's a lot of moving parts, and so it's not just distribution that you've got to get right on top of product. There's also pricing that's important, and to really, I guess, uh, bring everything together nicely when it comes to focusing on the product to launch and grow your startup. Uh, there's all these different moving parts. Um, you might have the right fit for the product and the market, but if you don't have distribution right, then you're going to have some trouble. If the pricing is right, then you're going to have some trouble as well. Uh, just to kind of jump into that a little bit deeper, I remember when I initially launched SquadTrip, which is a software platform for collecting money for group trips. I thought that we'd be able to partner with different travel consortia, so groups to distribute the product. Ultimately, we were building features around that. And after sort of getting some or invalidating some of my assumptions here, I kind of had to go back to the drawing board. And it really had impacts on our ability to get distribution. And and pricing is again something that we tinkered with a lot. And uh, when you really think about it, I mentioned having to wear a lot of hats. I wasn't able to just solely focus on the design, the features of the product, and how focusing on the product would lead to growth. I had to really understand the market, the dynamics there, and that led me to wearing a lot of different hats. I spent a lot of time, and I continue to spend a lot of time in a customer success role because it provides a lot of insight, whether it's understanding what the time to value is, uh, uh, or it's understanding, where the customer drop off is. All these things are important if we're not going to be relying on a sales team to sell that product. We really have to know like what those levers are that we can pull, and it might allow me to understand that, hey, might need to like make some changes to the onboarding flow. We may need to maybe remove a or create a freemium version of the product. um, I may need to understand, well, how many different touch points do they need, and is it that we actually need to bring somebody in to handle customer success, or can we automate this? And so all this sort of goes into designing that product experience to ultimately get the lift that you need.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. And I think you run into some interesting dynamics at a small company where, especially a zero to one startup, as I know you've been on that journey at SquadTrip, you've got to do a lot of product work without users and before you have paying clients, right? Which obviously all of our product best practices say find that sort of product user fit even before you find that product market fit. But at some small companies and with some new initiatives, you've got a bit of a chicken and egg problem there. So curious, Darren, can you speak to just how you've navigated that challenge of product definition a little bit?
I think it really started for me really doing these customer interviews, talking to folks that I think that we wanted to solve a problem for, there was a need, um, getting that insight from them. And again, having to read between the lines a bit, putting in front of them uh, different designs and mock-ups and getting reactions from them. And in some cases, really getting them to put a credit card down because just getting somebody to say, "Oh, I'm definitely going to use this product." They'll even tell you where more potential customers are, and then when you actually have it on the market, things are a little bit different. So I think our first 12 customers, we had them actually put a card down, pay in advance. Funny thing though, one of our customers paid us like 3 grand to build out the solution for them and then never used it. So like that's not even a foolproof
Yeah.
solution. And I was like, you really spent this much money, and I mean, we're talking about individual owner operators who are hoping to make $60,000 a year. So again, $3,000 for a customer, where that's what 5% of their earnings for the year is a huge investment. And so that's not even necessarily like the foolproof way to sort of figure out and understand what you should build. But I think that like it was just helpful to sort of weed out the noise.
Yeah.
Additionally, we even tried creating a wait list. And I think that goes back to distribution. Like, okay, let's pretend the product exists today. Like, how would we get it out in the market? How are people going to hear about that product? And I wish I'd spent more time on it, honestly, because you think you launched a product and it's one of those products where like you create a trip page and you share it, and so like in sharing it we're like, okay, it's gonna go viral, and um, come to find out that they're sharing trip pages to private groups, so it can't go viral.
Yeah.
So sometimes you really got to just kick the tires as much as you can, and there isn't a silver bullet.
Yeah, and maybe we probably should have done this a little bit earlier, come to think of it. But I think it'd be great just for everybody to hear a little bit about SquadTrip and the product that you're working on. Do you mind maybe just taking 30 seconds to a minute to describe the product and what it does, how it works, who it's for?
Sure. If you've ever been on a group trip with friends or family, then you know that collecting payments and communicating with guests is probably a headache. There's usually group chats and group chats within the group chats. Then there's Venmos, PayPals, and Cash Apps, exchanging of dollars. Just imagine what that's like for a tour operator or travel agent who's not doing a 10-person trip, they're doing an 80-person trip. They're not doing it one time a year, they're doing it hundreds of times a year. It's really a pain for them to collect money, manage bookings, marketing, and whatnot. And SquadTrip is an all-in-one SaaS solution that makes it easy for them to build out that trip landing page, share it, collect money through a number of different options, and ultimately save time so that they can sell more. Now we have uh, not just travel professionals on the platform, but doing destination weddings or tour groups and whatnot. But we've also got consumers who are planning their birthday parties and bachelor parties and meetups. I think post COVID, we're seeing that a lot of people were looking to travel, and so we wanted to just ride that wave.
Awesome. Yeah, so I think knowing that sort of target market, right? And this is, I think, in some ways that kind of B2B to C style product, right? Where you've got almost two sets of users to mind your end consumers who are driving some of the bookings and ultimate interactions, but then you've got the folks who are paying you to kind of configure their events and things in the platform. Really sort of, I think, classic SaaS pattern that we're seeing, especially in the B2B space, where now as product teams are being forced to think about those end users a little bit more. Just curious for you in these early days, especially, you kind of mentioned trying to get folks to just plug that credit card in, capture that payment, make sure they're on the dotted line there. Um, but how do you avoid being totally swayed by the asks of your paying clients and maybe demands to, deliver this feature to get somebody to sign up when you've got a vision to deliver, but at the same time you've got, revenue to generate, right? How do you balance that at this early stage?
Yeah, it's like walking a tightrope. To be honest, um, you've I feel like typically the loudest ones, the loudest customers aren't the ones you should necessarily be paying attention to.
Yeah.
They can
Those are
give you
good.
an idea of where to look, but you still got to do your due diligence. And working, on my own product at my own startup, it's you've got a series of bets that you can make. You got like no more than five or 10 a year, and you're managing cash flow on top of trying to understand what the opportunity is and grow the business. And oftentimes, I really have to make big decisions. I going back to December, January, there was a customer who signed up, paid in full for the year, had sold us this dream about these large cruise ships that he was going to sell out, and was like, "Well, you need to change the roadmap to make sure that I can
Yeah.
do my cruise ships trips on this platform." And we're talking about um, like 20 million in transaction volume, and um, I made the mistake. We spent 6 weeks building it out, and he still hasn't gotten a sale on it using that feature. It was pretty crushing. It kind of set us back, and I knew sometimes it's that shiny object syndrome. You're chasing the growth, and you're willing to do it at all costs, but not at the cost of potentially dying as a business. So uh, how I try to hedge that now is uh, is I've got a decision matrix, and ultimately it's, well, how is this going to affect um, awareness, retention, operationally? Is this going to unlock our engineering team, because we're product centric? We can't have a full stack team building everything for you. So like, is this going to help us save time as a company? Is this going to help us grow our sales? And um, we have a basically spits out a number based on the formula, and I've got to go by that. On top of it, I if I don't have enough information, you got to go back to the market and look at all the other products in the market. I'm not necessarily looking at, well, okay, can this one feature get us to a billion? It's just, well, can it get us to the next step?
Yeah.
Are there enough people that we can get in front of that would use this product? And if I'm not sure about it, I've got to put together a survey, send it out to the existing customers, maybe even run an ad and see how many people are going to click through, just to get a better sense of if this product or new feature that we're thinking about building is actually worth our time. Of course, you can get people to hopefully pay in advance, but again, there's somewhat of a science to it, and sometimes you don't have enough details, and that's where you have to lean on your gut. And that really comes from just understanding your customers, having that level of empathy, putting yourself in their shoes, and also just trying to build it as fast as possible so that the risk isn't so high.
Yeah, I think that really resonates coming up with those kinds of frameworks to enforce a little bit of discipline for yourself. I think that's a good practice, really, no matter what size company you're at. Um, but maybe that's a good opportunity to transition and talk a little bit about life at a larger company and contrast that, where, I would expect you probably have a little bit less worry around the cost of each individual feature because there are just many more features and more clients and a little bit more resiliency baked in. But yeah, why don't you walk us through, Darren, some of the other differences that you wanted to highlight here?
Yeah, I think you called it out. Resources, access to resources, knowing that if one or two steps in the wrong direction might set you back, maybe you don't get your bonuses. But and you took a good swing at a huge opportunity. But you know that the bills are going to get paid, and you're going to survive to see not another day, but another year. And it really depends on the level of, I guess, how large the company is. At Intap, I think we were getting ready to go public. There were still some large clients at the time that we wanted to just check the box on for some features for them. And so sometimes it still felt like, I think, um, a startup in ways because we're still chasing growth, right? But again, we had the benefit of knowing that we weren't going to go broke if we made the wrong decision this quarter. And so that's really key. Also, I've got here the roadmap is somewhat clear already. You've got customers, you have data, you've got distribution channels that are already paved. You know what's working. You've got I guess, the bread and butter, and you have some time to experiment with things, or you can dive deeper into what you know is already working. And I think that there's a level of like just knowing what works and being able to build on top of that adds some level of confidence to your team, and can help uh, steer you in the right direction, at least in, I'm going to say, the short term.
Yeah. So I think that's a really interesting contrast, right? Where, you're still leaning on clients here in the way you would in a smaller company setting. It's just, you maybe have to think through a little bit more critically how each piece of client feedback rolls up into a broader initiative, right? That's been a lot of my experience. And even, like you were alluding to in some of our firefighting days a few years ago, where you're still trying to get out ahead of some individual pieces of feedback to um, quell some hotspots. You still are contextualizing that in a broader program, that again, like you said, may or may not break the business. In most cases, it won't. Um, when it comes to your big company experience here, and like, what were some skill sets that you found yourself relying on as a PM that maybe are emphasized less or a little bit differently in your current role?
First thing that comes to mind is focus. But in truth, it's just a different type of focus. When you're working at a larger company, you're going to have to buckle down, and oftentimes that you've got these stakeholders. I wrote down at the bottom here, it might feel like waiting tables, but when you really think about, like, how the organization is structured, the plans that you may not be privy to, things like that. You've got to be able to focus and just hold the line. And it's like I guess, a beat of a drum. working on that roadmap that might be, not weeks, but months long, and sort of chipping away at it. And uh, it's kind of, in some cases, maybe it feels like eating your vegetables. It's something that's, if you, because you already have the customers, you already have the data, you already understand where you need to be going. There's fewer unknowns, and it could seem mundane, but at the same time, I think that the benefit in that is that you just have uh, all the work that's been done in the past to help inform where you're going to be going, um, versus when it comes to working at a startup, it might feel like I sometimes feel like I'm running around like a chicken with my head cut off. Um, and so I think that just coming down to like being able to focus. You've got the team that you can leverage to help you do it, but I think that's an important skill because you're not going to just necessarily have something crazy and different to conquer every week. Um, but I think it's a double-edged sword. Just kind of take the good with the bad.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. I think that's super interesting. And then, something else that comes to mind, when you're reflecting on just some of the experiences that you've had, right? And compare that to your lifestyle now. Obviously you're in a much different seat as a founder and executive of a business than you are as senior PM. But is there anything that you miss about the old job that might be informative as folks are thinking about, which side of the aisle fits them best?
One thing I miss is, as the CEO and founder of a company or even head of product, you're probably going to, at a startup, you're going to be, um, you're the resident expert in everything. I can convene a table around me of, excuse me, of my engineering team, customer support team, my investors, advisors, even, and it's really going to come down to like the you've all got to lean on me because I'm the one that has the most insight. I've talked to the most customers. I know the product probably just as well as the engineers. So one thing I just miss working at a larger company is, again, you can leverage that team. You can sit down with a group. I miss, like, talking to the account managers, customer success, product marketing team, engineering team together, and everybody has these different experiences. Some of whom have been here longer than me. That helps sort of inform, the direction that you go in. Of course, as the product manager, you manage the product. I guess you probably have, in many cases, the last say or an outsized say on things. But just being able to sit together at a table and talk shop with people who have um, all these other different experiences and knowledge, I think is just fun.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that is one of the things I value most. You've got that broad breadth of stakeholders, a lot of folks in dedicated roles who bring a big depth of experience into each of the specific functions that they support. Whereas, like you said, when you are the CEO, you are also all of those functions, at least in the early
Yeah.
days. So, any depth of knowledge is really in your own head already, which is a very different experience. I think that's actually really insightful, and something I think is good for folks to keep in mind. It's just a different set of coworkers, which people might not, fully grasp if you're kind of more familiar on the big company side. Um, Maybe, that's another good opportunity here to transition. So I know we wanted to talk a little bit about what it looks like, if you're hearing things about small company life that resonate with you or vice versa. I know everybody needs a job, it's easy to say, well, why don't you just go find a job at a big company if you want that, or vice versa. But that's easier said than done. So I want to, spend a little bit of time talking about what you can do within the context of your current role if you're eager to sort of get experience with different sets of problems. So let me shut up and turn it over to you, to Darrien, here to expand on this.
Sure. Yeah, I think that there's a number of different options if you find yourself wanting to tackle something new and daring on a monthly or quarterly basis. Then uh, a large company with a very tenured product and a 30-year-old brand may not always give you that excitement that you want, but at the same time, there's working at the early stage startup where too much excitement feels like a heart attack. So it really comes down to really understanding a couple things. One is, asking yourself, what are some of your career and lifestyle goals? Depending on what they are, there may be a path that's more suitable for you. To that point, um, risk appetite is something that you really need to consider here. But uh, I don't want to just make it just so black and white. I think that there's this sort of in between that exists. And I'd mentioned having worked at Intap, uh, publicly traded company. There's ample opportunity to work on uh, these really long shot projects, and you can really effectively operate as a startup within a larger company. That's what it felt like working under you, Dan. And so I think that I got to get the best of both worlds effectively. You've got that. Um, I guess you have, that you've got job security, and at the same time, you get to experiment and chart a new path that doesn't necessarily exist with launching a new product or a new set of features. So I think that's always an option here. And then I don't want to just necessarily say that some of the larger, even blue chip companies uh, don't have or just work a certain way. It really comes down to, like, understanding the manager that you're working with or the group that you're working with. And if you, I guess, don't see a clear opportunity, maybe you can make one. And so I definitely would encourage those who are thinking about something different to explore that path. Now, there's also um, within startups, it's not just always that early stage startup just raised $500,000, $1 million. That's not going to last that long. There are late stage startups as well. You might want to consider joining a team that's got, over 50 employees, over 100 employees. That's going to be a different feel from a company that has 10,000 employees. And if I'm remember correctly, I think LinkedIn actually just launched this new feature that allows you to search for companies that have recently raised funding. I think that's pretty cool for you to be able to find a company that maybe has raised, Series A or Series B level, raised tens of millions of dollars, so that you have some room to, I guess, get your startup fixed, but at the same time, know that that company and that product is a little bit more mature.
Nice. Yeah, I appreciate the plug for Intel. I do think we're pretty unique here in that we have an opportunity, like you said, to operate a little bit as a startup inside of a large company, which is, I think, definitely pretty rewarding. But I think that's an opportunity that a lot of folks can find at slightly larger companies. And I think you started alluding to that, Darren, just in thinking through ideas that might need a little bit more fleshing out, things that are brought up as moonshots but not really pursued. If you want to be the person to go pursue them, that tends to create that sort of opportunity that feels a little bit more 0 to 1, a little bit more, iterative and creative potentially. Do you have any advice for how to maybe raise the idea of tackling a project like that? Maybe talking to other executives at the company, getting budget for that, making the business case. Any tips for how to position that to actually make a project like that happen?
Yeah, I think if you're in the product space, you already have uh, the skill set and the tools to just have that level of empathy and put yourself in the shoes of the buyer. In this case, that might be your manager who has to sign off for a VP. And you can treat it as if they're a client, and you really just try to understand their persona. What are their fears, their desires, their wants, their needs, and then use that as an opportunity to look for opportunities, and really treat it seriously. You could go as far as to put together a pitch deck, equipped with the research and the information, and making sure that it's crystal clear the value add not only for the organization but the value add for maybe your manager who you have to, I guess, go to bat with. And even that, again, reminds me of a time where I won't say, but we were going in a direction that required a huge sign off, a huge chunk of the budget. And that's kind of the approach I took. We spoke to you about it. We really gamed it out, looked at what the risk versus reward was, and put together a presentation that made sense, and you felt comfortable enough to actually share it with senior management. And we actually got that project greenlit. And I think that, like, your manager, or senior managers are looking for opportunities, and so it's just a matter of being able to articulate it in a way that shows the value and makes sense. And as a product manager, you probably already had those skills, and so it's probably first nature.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good point, and that is a good way to frame it, right? You've kind of got just other stakeholders that you're trying to empathize with, and use that empathy to uh, pitch in a way, and to drive and solve for. And so creating that proposal is not unlike creating a product, and coming up with the requirements that need to be met, as you would for other things. So I like that framing. I think that kind of goes to another question that popped up for me, which is just around skill sets. And as you're thinking through different skill sets that lend themselves to different settings, I'm curious, like, what are some skill sets that you prioritize hiring for in your position as somebody driving a kind of newer startup? And then part two of that question would be, what are some ways that people could build those skills if they're in a larger company?
Skill set. Uh, I think at my stage, uh, a company, we've got an early product, we've got early revenues, early customers. We're starting to pick up growth, like 20% growth month over month right now. So it feels good. And we're a pre-seed company. Just want to, put all the details out there. So it's going to be different at each stage. But for a pre-seed seed company, our team is really small. And so to even figure out what the skill set was, I think it started off with like soft skills. It wrote down values, much like you might write like the values and product pillars, right? So what are the company pillars, pillars of the people on the team, the values, and being clear about that, and even giving examples for each one. I think that helped me to sort of understand who I'm hiring for. Ultimately, because we're so small, People have to be self-starters. They have to be willing to wear multiple hats. Um, have a lot of grit, um, and I think that even when it comes to like hard skills, though, there's going to be one or two major tasks or projects that we need to get done. So we're going to hire for somebody who's done that in the past. And I realized that that's a must. Hiring for somebody who, has the passion is not necessarily enough when we're going to be measured based on what we can execute on, and we don't have that much time. So I had to make sure that they had the skill set. In the case of hiring our product manager last fall, I needed to know that she had done it in the past. She had worked on a small team, but what was also important was ensuring that when faced with things that she hadn't done before, like, can you pick things up pretty fast? Because if we decide we're going to create some partnership marketing program and maybe even build it into the product or something like that, or doesn't matter what it is, then I need to know that like I can lean on somebody on the team to be able to do it. Because if you tell me that you can't do it, and you pass the buck back to me, then I've got another thing that I need to handle on top of leading the team, leading the product, and even fundraising, for example. So I think it was just really key to focus on somebody who even if they haven't done it before, just has that level of grit and confidence. Like, I will sit down, even if it takes me 6 hours, we'll figure it out.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I that totally resonates, and I love that you're using the word grit here. I think that's just so critical. I mean, almost cliche at this point to talk about in a startup context, but I think it's an underrated attribute for PMs, even at larger companies as well. So just going back to part two of my question, and this might be a little bit self-evident, but just to put a finer point on it, like, how would you recommend somebody demonstrate that they have those attributes so that when they come to an interview with you and you're asking, tell me about a time when, they've got some tangible examples that show they've got this skill set you're looking for?
Yeah, I think it really comes down to putting yourself in those positions to fail, to make mistakes, and to learn. And really going to your team, and I mean, you might have the things that the must-haves that you need to execute on with your product, and but think about what more you can do. It might be outside of your wheelhouse. It might be, convening a team, making sure that like customer success is sharing information with the engineering team and uh, marketing, and maybe that didn't exist at your company. So finding those opportunities, and even if you don't do it well the first time around, I think it's really getting those reps in and having the willingness to do it. Ultimately, over time, you'll hone the skills or develop the skills, and it really just comes down to like making yourself invaluable for your team. In doing so, then you're gonna have those experiences to talk about. But then you'll also have, a manager for when the time comes for you to, join another group or something like that. They can go to bat for you and say, hey, uh, uh, this person was an invaluable part of the team. They went above and beyond, and here are some examples.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And I think that's a lot easier for your manager to do, obviously, when you're putting yourself out there and looking for those types of experiences. And, you know, you want to feed somebody who's hungry, you know what I mean? So you'll give opportunities to people that are seeking them. And then if you're able to capitalize, obviously that begets more cool stuff to do. So um, that's maybe a good note to pause on here. I think this has been a really informative discussion. Again, I know this is a pretty fundamental part of career development and some of the thinking that goes into structuring your road in product management, and not just, as sort of an early stage PM, but as an executive as well. Um, does anyone have any questions from the audience? While folks are thinking, I think I'd like to ask, just, from that executive perspective, um, is there any kind of unique piece of advice or um, kind of unique note that you would mention for what it looks like to be an executive in a smaller company versus one that's a bit bigger, things people should keep in mind or target? I know that's a common thinking or line of thinking, right? I'm a senior PM or I'm a director. Do I want to go be like a VP, right, at a small startup, or do I want to try to continue my trajectory at a larger business? Um, any thoughts on, some attributes or things folks might want to balance as they're considering that decision?
It's a good question. When I think about the differences there, um, one that comes to mind is responsibility and the weight of the responsibility. But at the same time, at a larger organization, quite possibly you could have a lot of responsibility. So just want to be fair there. I think it really comes down to just being comfortable with the unknown. And so if you're switching to a smaller company, there there's just going to be so many unknowns, a series of unknowns where you're effectively looking to validate or invalidate different parts of the business. And there isn't just like a roadmap or a rule book there. And so I think that's one of the clear differences. And some people thrive in ambiguity. Others are looking for a process. Uh, I've even spoken to some senior level PMs interested in making the switch themselves. Uh, One of the things I realized I needed to really dig into with them is, well, like, do you like talking strategy, or are you able and willing to execute? Because at a smaller organization, there isn't going to be some junior PM that you can have write up the tickets or the release notes or something, and you're always going to have a ton of stuff to do. So you're going to need to be willing to roll up your sleeves, and also find ways to be super efficient, like using ChatGPT to help you write those release notes. Um, and
Right.
I mean, I don't think that there's necessarily like a right or wrong here. I don't get me wrong. I really love like talking strategy and ideas, um, and I have fun doing it. Unfortunately, just I have to reel myself in and and focus because we don't have a large enough team for me to come into a meeting and talk about stuff and do whiteboard sessions for an hour and then walk away and go to lunch. I've got to be the one to also execute on it as well. And the downside to that is that uh, maybe you want to work on a number of different projects, a number of different, take a couple different swings at bat, and having a team that you can leverage. Now, that's a blessing. Having multiple, like, a carved out engineering team to focus on something that's a small bet for the future while also focusing on what you need to do today. Oftentimes at a startup, you're going to need to make a decision and you're not going to be able to go down both paths at the same time. So, um, those are some things that I think are really important to consider.
It's really good stuff. Yeah, I think the responsibility thing, like you said, it's obviously you could have a lot of responsibility at a large company, but it's a different flavor of the responsibility that comes with sort of being that PM really top to bottom from a process standpoint and getting all the way deep in the weeds and all the way at the top of the strategy as well. I think that's a really important call out. I see we've got somebody with the hand raised, and I know we're asking to have questions here in the chat. So happy to answer your question. Please type it in. We'll read it out to the audience and get that answered. I have another one here for you, Darrien. Just looking to understand, you know, kind of going back to some of your experience in building SquadTrip here currently. You know, product-led growth is, I think, the maxim that a lot of people aspire to. We talked a little bit about the balance of your kind of intrinsic roadmap with the pressures that you get from your initial sets of paying clients, but how do you think about getting that product-led growth flywheel off the ground in your startup? And you know, what are some ways that can be, you know, kind of a unique challenge here for you in this role?
That's a great question. In terms of how it's a unique challenge, I um, I have to oftentimes switch sides of the table, just because uh, focusing on product-led growth, you need to ensure that the product has like requires low to no touch, right? But at the same time, in order for me to understand where we need to go, what's working and what's not, from a distribution, pricing, product positioning standpoint, I've got to be as close to the customer as possible. So I have to create ways. Sometimes I've created friction on purpose, just so that I could talk to the customers. Sometimes with that low to no touch product, they're going to sign up, they're going to breeze through it, they're going to use the product. You send them an email and ask them, for feedback, or they just won't respond to you.
Yeah,
And I'm like,
yeah,
okay, they paid this month, so they must be happy. I see the
right.
usage is going up, but I need to look ahead 2 quarters, and I need to figure out what direction we're going to go in, and I need to talk to people. So I've kind of got to switch gears and downshift, and maybe sometimes force customers to talk to us. And so, but I think I have fun doing it, for sure. And then when it comes to resources, it's always figuring out, do we build this new feature? Like shareability, I think, is like the name of the game for this month, right? Like we're launching a couple features that just make it easy to share, um, so that our product can get into more hands of the travelers, who can then, through use of the product, use it themselves or spread the word. But at the same time, they like I have to think about, um, do we build features that unlock time for our engineers? Do we fix some nagging bugs? And so having a lack of resources means that sometimes I'm having to choose between one product pillar and another.
No, I think that's good. I love that anecdote, or just, you know, kind of thought around some deliberate friction. Because like you said, otherwise that can be a pretty smooth flywheel and it's tough to find the right point to engage. So that's a really interesting tip that you shared there. All right, cool. We've got a couple questions here in the chat. I'm actually going to start with the second one. The question is, how does SquadTrip's current product strategy align with the company's long-term vision?
One thing, I'm in a tech incubator space, they call it. There's a bunch of other founders here, advisors and investors walking the halls. I hear this once a week, um, and people just say the name of the game is to stay alive. uh, so, like right now, I think the product strategy um, that we're taking here uh, forces us to have a low subscription cost and a freemium model, where I think in the long term we'll go in a different direction. But uh, at the, I guess, at the expense of revenue, we're focusing on growth right now. Um, and so I think that that's one example of how I guess we price the product um, that even affects sort of um, our potential company's long-term vision and where we want to be in the future. I'm trying to think. There's another one that kind of came to mind. I sort of lost my train of thought here. Um,
That's okay.
product
Yeah.
strat.
We've got maybe another question that's a little bit
Okay,
related, just about your competitors and what differentiates your product from theirs.
sure. I think our biggest competitor in the space is Excel. Like a lot of tour operators and travel agents, I don't want to say using pencil and paper, but they're using spreadsheets to track sales. They're using tools like PayPal and even Stripe to collect payments, and so it's a I guess disparate solutions that they're having to string together. Some are even building out custom solutions. So I think that's our main competitor, and I guess what differentiates us from that, where it's probably cheaper to use, is the fact that they've got an all-in-one solution that's built specifically for group travel experiences that helps them save time and sell more. Now, one of our competitors in the space that I think is probably like the closest to us, they focused on tour operators, and we focus on group trips. And there's like a nuanced difference there. Like some of the tours are groups, and many of our group trips are tours, but so there's some overlap there, but it's not always the same. And so, in terms of how we make decisions on what to build first, or our our marketing, or some of the words that we use are gonna be a little bit different. Means that we also attract customers that maybe are not suitable for them, and they attract customers. We attract customers that are not suitable for them, and vice versa. Um, but even as I think about, I guess, the future of SquadTrip, we're going to need to differentiate some more. And I think if we're even going to compete in the same space where there are tour operators doing group trips, we're going to need like a 10x solution to really convert their customers into our customers.
Yeah, I like it. It's really exciting. And last question as old as time. Do you have any openings?
Currently, I do not have any openings. We actually did have somebody who was focused on product for some time, and I think she was amazing. She's since moved on, and I think I realized, um, rather than backfilling, that like there were conversations that she was having, and with the knowledge that she had, it was very valuable to have her on the team. But like at this stage right now, I need to optimize for the conversations that I'm having with the customers, using the product, because that's just going to help me for the next couple of quarters and understanding the direction that we're going in. And I think that, once we probably raise our next round of funding, maybe 2 rounds away, I think that like I want to sort of ensure that I'm in that seat where I'm getting the data points directly from the customers as much as possible, at least before we hire for product. But I think um, in the next couple of quarters, we'll probably hire in sales, and maybe it'd be nice if I can bring on a chief of staff.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, know you've got a community here that's eager to join you on the journey by the sounds of it, if and when you get around to hiring more PMs. But I think that's a good place to wrap things up. Darren, I really appreciate you making the time to join us for this conversation and to share some of your thoughts and wisdom on, just some of these kind of fundamental aspects of your PM career and journey that need to be considered. I think this is great material for our community to have in mind and have access to. And we'd welcome you back if you're ever interested in coming again and doing another session with us here in the New York City chapter. We'd love to have you. But thanks again.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I had a good time discussing all these different topics. And yeah, I'm looking forward to some of the future conversations that you'll have in the next coming weeks. And last part, go Knicks.
Saying that to a Sixers fan. All good. Well, thanks everyone. I really appreciate it. Hope everybody has a good rest of their Wednesday, and we'll talk to you again next month.